Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone can be seated that's in the auditorium. And welcome all of you that are watching online from many different countries, also within the United States. Thank you for joining us. If you could be turning over in your teacher's manuals, of course we're in the self-control unit. If you have a character unit close by, you'll want to go ahead and grab that, because we're going to be going through that just a little bit tonight to rehearse some of the things that we've already covered. Because some of the things that we're building on tonight, we really went through a great detail of this information in the character unit, but now we're adding another aspect to it. We're adding some, not just self-control, but we're putting in the minds of the students about, now that they know that, as we said in the character unit, that we are interdependent, and we'll discuss what that means again as we move through the class, but it pretty much means that we all depend on each other. And we're going to learn that the self-control is a very important ingredient that we all must have in order for this interdependency to work. And it's very important that everyone kind of expects something from someone else. And it's very important that we all understand that something is also expected of us. And that there's certain standards that when we see people and we want them to live to this certain standard, well, that's the same standard that ourselves must also adhere to. And a lot of times in schools, you'll see that everyone will report on what the teacher's doing, or you'll see children do this sometimes even within your own household. They'll come run and tell you what the other person's doing, but they leave out all the detail of what they're doing. And of course, a lot of times there'll be situations where they break down because it wasn't just one aspect that was breaking down. There were a number of aspects that were breaking down. So once again, turning over to LP6C, we're going to be looking at Procedure 1. And of course, we're going to be reviewing the previous lesson plan, Maintaining Your Self-Control, and we're going to take a brief look back into some things that we've already covered in last class. And once again, we kind of hit on this last class, but for the What I Have Learned section of Chapter 5, you can go back and watch David's class that he gave, and he went through great detail in that class. So here, starting off, remember the procedures, always review the previous chapter. And it says, review the previous lesson, Maintaining Your Self-Control, by asking students the following questions. Question number 1, we want to ask students, what are some influences that can affect your ability to practice self-control? Now, also remind them, and when you ask this question, ask them, now, I'm asking you what are some influences, but first, tell me what is an influence. Always rehearse this and remind our students. The author of the Peaceful Solution always told us when he was going through teaching us and when we became certified that man, human, woman, man, woman, child, everyone, we all learn through repetition, because all of these things are skills. So never forget that when you tell somebody something and you're trying to get them to retain it, you have to do it through repetition. So never take for granted that they remember what an influence is. Ask them and see if they can remember. See if they remember where they read about it. Of course, in the self-control unit, you'll find it on page 118. And of course, you'll find out the positive and negative from 119 and 120. When we went through it in the character unit, we found it on page 60. So if you want to put those notes in your book, you can. It helps you to have a quick, you're able to flip back to those pages that you need. After you read it enough, it kind of sticks in your mind, and all those page numbers just stick there. But while you're turning your books there, turn over to page 118, because we want to go back, and of course we're discussing what an influence is, and of course how they affect our ability to practice self-control. So on page 118, and this was in chapter 5, in the last chapter, it says, question of the day, what are influences? And we read here, it says, an influence is something or someone who can affect the way you think, feel, and act. Now, it's a little bit different than the definition that's given on page 6 of the character unit, but the definitions, even though they vary, are the exact same outcome for both definitions. Anything or anyone that has the ability to change or to affect the way that we think, feel, and act. And remember, all actions start with a thought, then they bring forth feelings, and then there's actions. And these things can be done over a period of time, or they can be done very quickly. But continuing on here, it says, influences can also affect what you value or they can affect what you value. Excuse me. Having phones in front of you that are going off like either nuclear war just started or we have just very busy things going on, and I don't think nuclear war started. Influences can also affect what you value, or they can motivate you to adopt new values. Anything that has the potential to affect what you value also has the potential to affect your character and hence your self-control. And then also remind them and ask them, what are values? And what does one person value, does another person value? Remember, we talked about aesthetic values, and then we talk about things that all of us should value. Moral character, rules, the things that help society run smooth and keep us safe, those are things we should all value. We should also value the possessions of others and showing respect to them. And we discussed that also in the character unit, and we've discussed it in the acceptance unit also. But remember, to value something, it's something that well, let's turn over to page 6 real quick. That way you can have it from the character unit, but there's something else in there I want to read to you. So on page 6 of the character unit, it says values are what you believe in. Now think about what we're believing in here. We're talking about a system of society. That's what we're going to get into, and rules that can keep us safe. First of all, you have to have people that value those rules and actually believe in those rules and that they will do what they say they will do. But once again, values are what you believe in or feel strongly about. They also play a key role, notice, in developing your character. You could say our character, but this is being individualized to talk to each person. And whether you're a teacher that's teaching in a classroom, and you think about a school, you know, of course, your classroom can make up a small society. There's values within a classroom, and there's different values. You can go from having physical education, or we used to call it PE. There, when you went in, after you got to middle school and high school, you were required to bring a change of clothes. And hygiene was supposed to be valued. You were not supposed to go into physical education and wear the clothes that you're going to be wearing all day, because you're going to get sweaty, you're going to get stinky. And let's just face it, whenever junior high comes along, not everybody's aware of deodorant. And those things can make for a very, we'll just say strong atmosphere in the classroom. And these were things that the schools were trying to do to help cut down on certain things. They even had showers there, but nobody ever used them. But they did require you to change. And that was something. Now, if you went to biology class, there would be certain things you might be required to wear, because there you did dissection of animals. I remember we did the eye of a cow. We never did the frog. I heard a lot about people doing frogs, but we dissected the eye of a cow. So you had to wear something over your clothes, and that was required. And then, of course, English class, you could just come as you were. You just had to bring your books. But you think about requirements and values. You go from one place to another. All of those things can change, but they're still important. And we have to remember that those rules, that as you go into a classroom, the teacher values those rules. We, in valuing education, we have to respect and value those rules. We live in a society to where when you go into the grocery store and you think about how the grocery store is laid out, you value having some kind of, something that lays out the items to where, could you imagine if you had disorganization and you had the salt on aisle 1, the pepper on aisle 3, the cinnamon on aisle 15, the oregano, and all these other spices you have, and they were just scattered throughout the store. That's what society is like when you don't have rules and regulations to help organize society. And of course, the thing we have to organize first is our thought process, because those thoughts are going to bring forth those feelings and bring forth actions. And when those thoughts start going, if you don't value or believe in this system of morality, your thoughts can betray you, so to speak, when they get to the feelings. And we'll get into that tonight too, because remember, hindsight can be 20/20. But once again, going back here to page 6 of the character unit, it says the sum total of everything you value becomes your value system. And once again, as we mature and grow, our parents share their values with you just like their parents shared their values with them. Now, this is in ideal situations. If your parents value smoking marijuana and they share that with you, that's not a positive value that you should have. And, that's not something that's building. Remember page 8 that we talked about is that dividing line between right or wrong. And we shouldn't value anything that would bring harm to ourselves, someone else, or the environment. So we're talking about these values, and we're talking about influences. So here, once again, back to page 118 of the self-control unit, page 118 of the self-control unit. And we said that anything that has the potential to affect what you value, and that's what an influence is, it also has the potential to affect your character and hence your self-control. Because remember, if we value doing negative things, whether it be doing illicit drugs, watching illicit programming, if we'd rather play video games instead of study for the exam, all of these things can end up in a negative situation. But continuing on here, it says, did you know that your parents or guardians are the most influential people in your life? Well, why would they be? Well, they're the people you live with. And if you've ever heard the old saying, you really don't know someone till you live with them. You can take the best of friends and put them in a house and let them live together for 3 or 4 months, and they can get sick of each other really quick. I can't believe he puts his toothbrush there on the sink like that. I can't believe she does this, or I can't believe she does that. And you can really grow old on each other very quickly. But of course, there are factual relationships that you can live together and make it work. We call that marriage usually. And if you can't make that work, you got to figure out the breakdown of the system. And the system isn't, the part of keeping your word. It's the part of, it's the part of you doing what you're supposed to do. The system requires us to keep our word. When we get to where we think we have a better way, that's when it breaks down. But once again here, it says, it is from them that you learn what to value. And those can be positive or negative. And remember, values change as we gain knowledge and experience, whether they're not negative or positive. A parent or parents can teach their children to be honest, and the child can steal. They can teach their children to not do drugs, and the child can do drugs. And it works the other way. A parent can teach their child, hey, drugs is okay, marijuana is legal everywhere. And the child can set in their mind, no, I'm not doing that. I've read studies where it says that it affects my ability to learn. There's a lot of scientific studies out there. And of course, there's a lot of scientific studies that say, but it's okay if you have a terminal illness. But it also tells you the side effects that come with it. And it's with every drug that you see in society, and I'm not trying to speak against what the pharmaceutical industry is doing as far as prescribing medication, but me, myself, speaking for myself, when I see a medication that says, oh, this can keep my nose from running and my eyes from itching when I have allergies, that's great. But then I see it can cause liver failure, kidney failure, bleeding from your eyes, other sorts of side effects. My nose running and my eyes itching doesn't seem too bad after that. That seems like a pretty fair trade. I'll just take the running nose and itching eyes. But some people in society will take it and go, there's probably not many people that end up with that. All it takes is one, and who's going to be the one? So you have to consider your options before you make your choices. But of course, all of these things are influences. If you don't want runny eyes, well, you shouldn't have runny eyes. You can have runny eyes, but it's your nose and your eyes itching, you got to think about it. There might be other things you can do for it also. But continuing on here, it says that your personality and character are developed through the environment that your parents or guardians provide for you. There are many other influences. They range from subtle and harmless to obviously dangerous. In fact, some influences are so subtle that you might not realize that you're being influenced to think or behave in a particular way. And of course, below that, you see the study that was done with a can of soda that was flashed during the movies, and we've referenced this many times, but it actually shows how very quickly you can be influenced to do something. And here on the very bottom of page 118, notice it says, the second sentence, not only are influences powerful, remember the character units told us to never underestimate the power of an influence. They are all around you. Everything that you experience through your senses has the potential to influence your choices. It is up to you to be aware of the influences around you and be prepared to practice self-control in what you will allow yourself to be influenced by. And of course, over to the right-hand side here, just to remind our students, positive influences will motivate you to make choices and decisions that will build your character. So they will teach you to value these things. Positive influences will not conflict with moral choices. Positive influences can come in many different forms. They can be a person and experiences, a book that you have read, or even a show that you've seen. And then, of course, we also have negative influences. Looking over to page 120, negative influences can cause you to make choices that are immoral. And remember, what does it mean to be immoral? It means we cause harm to ourselves, someone else, or the environment. We actually do things that break down our society. And a moral choice can have a negative effect on your character. It can result in harm to yourself and others. Like positive influences, negative influences can also come in different forms. Now, back to our original question. You know, we've covered what values are, we've covered what an influence is, and now back to our original question. What are some influences that can affect your ability to practice self-control? And of course, we'll see here, there's some given. Now, through page 5, it's laid out all the way through the chapter, and it goes into detail. But here in italicized letters, you see television, movies, songs, video games, and friends are all sources of both positive and negative influences. You know, we can be influenced even by the tone of someone's voice. If someone comes up and say, "Hey, did you see what he did? I can't believe he did that." The person will automatically go, "Yeah, me either. What did he do?" You know, they'll automatically bleed into it. And then you can have people that, you know, you can have best of friends, and, you know, someone comes to you and goes, "Hey, do you know your friend Johnny stole that?" "Nah, Johnny wouldn't do that. Johnny didn't do that." "Absolutely not. He didn't do that." Do you know if Johnny actually did it or not? You probably need to get the facts. That's what we teach in the Feasible Solution. Get the facts before you make a decision. So think about these things and these influences that come, because it's not always, and we can do that to other people also. You know, that's the whole rhyme or reason of having political campaigns, is to influence people and to tell people negative things about other people, and this is why I'm so much better. And we're getting ready to see that mudslinging come out a lot again on television and billboards. You know, that's something else that is a huge influence. As you're driving down the road, if you're seen with your phone like this in the state of Texas, they'll give you a ticket for it. But for some reason, it's acceptable to plaster billboards all the way down the road, so you're driving like this, looking at all the billboards. Somehow that's okay. And now we have digital billboards, so you have to wait until it changes as you're going by. You can actually see 3 advertisements at once. I'm not saying that texting and driving is a great thing. I'm saying that it's pretty confusing when you say you don't look in front of you, which that's a bad idea. Lots of accidents take place, but also looking this way when you're driving and this way when you're driving is not a great idea either. So think about these things, because all of these are influences. And if you get pulled over texting and driving, don't use that as an excuse. You're still going to get a ticket. So just don't be doing it. Now here with the next part, B. Question B, and this is for our students. And once again, we're trying to get back into their minds what we've covered previously. And there's an enormous amount of information on these topics as of this time that we've covered through the character unit, the acceptance unit, and now into the self-control unit. And it says, what can you do to practice self-control in the midst of negative influences? And remember, we just read what negative influences are, and they have the ability to affect you negatively, even your value system. They can break down your value system to where you will actually start to practice and value negative things. Well, of course, here we see that you must react. And if you'll turn over to page, I think that's 121. No, 121 says 129. 129. We'll go to the STOP acronym next. But of course, the way we react, and if you remember, that means to recognize, examine, act, consider, and think. And on page 129, of course, that's the acronym that we bring forth here in the Peaceful Solution. At the very top in the box, you see that we need to recognize whether the influence is positive or negative, examine all of our options. You know, those are, we can make right choices or wrong choices. We need to act with positive moral character. So then we need to take action and do a positive thing, make a positive choice. And then, of course, consider the consequences or rewards. If when we do negative things, people think that, hey, stolen sugar tastes sweeter. Well, it does till you get caught. And then the reality of what you did sets in, and then there's a price to pay. You know, I remember my grandmother saying that you could always pay 10 cents for sugar or you can pay 10 years for sugar, but you have to choose which one you want to pay. And it was an example she was given, someone in my family who had recidivism was a huge problem, I'll say. And it took them a while to realize when you do bad things, you end up in jail, and you can spend half your life in jail. And it goes by really quickly. You know, but she kept trying to get it through the mind, and I guess it eventually worked. After about 20 years in prison, I guess they spent through many different areas. But, you know, it's 20 years of your life you can't get back. And when you're the one doing it and you know you're doing it, it's not like someone accused you and it was wrong. We're talking about people that knowingly did things wrong and admitted to it, didn't hide it. So once again, consider the consequences or rewards, and then, of course, think about making the right choice. Now, that doesn't mean, well, think about it. Well, I could do what's right, but I sure want to do what's wrong. That sure looks awful tempting. I think that's the best option. You know, I'll just do what's wrong. You know, we're talking about encouraging the process of understanding that there's consequences, and it can be life or death. It truly can be. If your parents value doing drugs, and then you see them doing drugs, and you go into the room and you get their drugs, and you take their drugs to school, and you have someone who doesn't value drugs, and they're very much against doing illegal drugs, and you give it to them, and you influence them to take them, and they overdose and die. Hopefully we can start seeing the chain effect of how negative values can bleed out into people that you've never even met. You can have a negative value system, and the way you've influenced someone else to accept these negative values can just, I'll say, bleed out to other people, and it's life or death situations. And you know, no matter how much we like to say, I'm sorry doesn't work when someone's laying in the morgue because we didn't make the right choice. Some decisions we make and some things we say are very permanent. There's no reset button. You know, it's not a video game. It's stuff that takes place in life that we have to be accountable for. Things, situations, opportunities arise. And if we don't make or take the best that we can do at that time, then the consequences are always there. But continuing on here on page 129 with the REACT acronym, it says, let's take a closer look. The R, of course, recognize whether the influence is positive or negative. And it says, remember, a negative influence can be dangerous and can affect your ability to make positive choices. A positive influence shows value for life and encourages the building of moral character. So we're talking about building moral character, and we're getting into society. That's the chapter we're getting into. So where does it start? Think about that, and have your students start thinking about this. If we're talking about building positive character in society, where does that start with? If you have 30 people in the room, you should be able to get 30 different answers, and every answer should be correct, because every person should have their finger pointing at them. And that's really where it starts. If we want to build a society of moral character, it starts with each and every one of us. And then, of course, E, examine all of your options and make the right choice. Once you have determined if an influence is negative, consider your choices. Here are some simple options that can help if a violent or sexually explicit movie is on TV. And notice here are your options. turn to another channel. Doesn't mean turn, from one violent movie to the next either. Ride your bike with permission. Turn off the TV. Do homework. Some people would consider that a negative choice. It's a negative choice until you show up to school the next day and then you didn't do your homework and you get in trouble. One thing I always try to encourage students, and I think about this when I was back in school. When I would get homework, I would always try to make sure I rushed and got it done the morning before I had to go to school. When I went home, in my mind, I gave the school my day. I'm going home, I'm playing basketball, I'm on the football team, I'm on the basketball team, I'm playing baseball. This is a school-sponsored thing. They just have to understand that this is taking up my afternoon and my evening. So I don't have time for homework. And then I would try to rush to get it done the next morning. And it made for a very bizarre rising out of bed, so to speak, because you wake up and the first thing that hits you is, oh, I'm already behind. I got to get all this homework done. That takes place as adults too. And it's not necessarily homework. But this homework is there, as I started out by saying, it's put reminders in our minds so that we can rehearse things. And that homework that we're giving is to prepare us for class the next day. And when you find out that you don't do your homework, and this is not just your math, your social studies, or your English, we're talking about character here and rehearsing what it takes to make a right choice. When we don't do our homework and when situations arise, and I can guarantee you, and you don't have to take my word for it, you're going to experience this, situations are always going to arise. Sometimes 10 in one day, sometimes 10 in 1 hour, sometimes 10 in 1 minute. And they can be going very different directions. It's like a rubber ball in a square room, it just won't stop bouncing. And you're trying to grab the rubber ball, and every time you grab at it, somebody smacks it, makes it go a little faster. And that's what it feels like sometimes. And the stress and the frustration, when you get a lot of hands smacking the ball, it becomes very frustrating. Sometimes you just sit back and hope the ball stops bouncing, and then you can start working with it. Well, notice here we can read an appropriate book. Bake some cookies. Of course, that's what I've tried to do over the years. Not me, but someone else. I try to eat the cookies. Be respectful of those cooking them. Eat as many as possible. Go for a walk or do your chores. That's another thing that people don't desire to do, children and adults, until you go into your closet, you go to grab a shirt, and it's like, where are all my clothes? Oh, they're still in the floor. Well, I threw them. That's where they're all at. And that's a pretty common thing for teenagers. Not just teenagers, but common amongst teenagers. And then, of course, we see A here. It says, act with positive moral character. Be prepared to make a stand to do what is right for the building of your character. And making a stand doesn't mean like you're going to, or it's not being expressed as you're taking a stand and there is no way anybody can talk me into doing anything else. Now, if it's negative, yes, take a very firm stand. But if it's a positive thing you're being showed, sometimes there's more than one way to skin a cat, is what they say. Sometimes that you think that you know what's right, and it might not be wrong. But you might find out there's someone else that can come behind you that has more experience that can show you a better way. So never think that when an authority is talking to you and you've taken your stand and they're trying to tell you to do something in a positive way, be willing to listen. Remember, listening is a skill, so taking a stand also means I'm not going to do what's wrong, but I'm willing to listen to more about what is right. I'm willing to be educated even further. And then consider the consequences or reward. The consequences of negative influences might not be obvious right away. Usually they never are. We've talked about that through some of the explicit things that teenagers experience that they pay for later on in their life, and they're known as STDs. For example, the effects of watching violent movies might not be evident until you react violently to a situation. Rewards might not always be tangible. It is a reward in itself just knowing you've done the right thing. One thing that studies have shown, and there's organizations out there that are now trying to, they've been out there for a while now, and they've got some really decent videos out showing the dangers of certain programming that you would think, I go on the internet's full of it, there's all these websites, you watch all this illicit programming. I just watched it, then I turn the phone off, it goes away. Can't get an STD through the phone. but you're teaching yourself that certain things are okay. That's what it's teaching you. And there's scientific studies and there's organizations that are bringing these things out to where it's a scientific fact. These things actually rewire the brain. One thing that's most people understand this, I would think they understand this. If they don't, teachers should look into it and express these to our students. The brain has a very hard time differentiating between what is real and what is fictitious. When you have something playing in front of you, whether it be a movie or an illicit program, the brain doesn't determine whether it's real or not. It just knows that you're feeding it something. And of course, imaginations run wild. And this is a teaching tool. And remember, your thoughts are the beginning process of your actions. And what you think is, oh, I would never do something like that. If you feed yourself enough negativity, in 6 months, it's like, it's not that bad. I did it, and I didn't get anything. All these teachers telling me I do stuff, and I'm going to suffer for it, and these things are going to take place in my life. I did it, and I don't have any problems. And then you wake up one morning, and you're like, what is all that? Well, that's the reward. It just showed up about 6 months late, 8 months late, showed up as cancer later on in life. You know, the rewards, sometimes you have to grow them like in a garden. You plant it, sometimes it takes years to see the tree actually come to its full potential. You plant that seed in your body, it's not a tree that comes to full potential. It's heart disease or cancer or other very devastating effects it has on the life. Now, not saying that everyone who has heart disease or cancer has done very illicit things. I'm not saying that. But it does contribute to society when we do them. And remember, what we do can spread. You can look at the news and see that in monkeypox right now. You can see that in COVID right now. Things that we acquire, once we have those things, if we get them, how do we conduct ourselves? And are there rules that really govern these things? Well, of course there are. But how important and serious do people in society take these rules? Well, they don't take them very seriously. And, well, how do you know they don't take them seriously? Because it spreads. If you have something and it's spreading due to the actions of people, then those people need to practice restraint, find out what's causing it, and then you can start bringing it down. You know, and in society, we reacted with vaccines. And this is a very common thing. The President of the United States just recently come out and said it. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who was under a lot of pressure, who just recently also contracted COVID, has said it. You know, we never said vaccines will keep you from getting COVID. We've never said that. And then a lot of society was like, then why did you tell us to get vaccines again? Well, you won't be as sick. You'll still get sick, but you won't be as sick. You know, even though usually when you want to make a statement like that, you have to get some data behind that. And it takes a while to get data. You don't get data in 6 months or less. So, you know, these are things that they're trying to help comfort the minds of the people. But you have to stand back, and this is nothing against President Biden or Dr. Anthony Fauci. You have to stand back and look at monkeypox and other things and think, when in society will leaders say, this is what's causing it, this is what you need not to do? This is what's causing it. Now, if this is causing it, you know, if you had a pencil and you're stabbing your hand and your hand's hurting and it's bleeding, and you know that it's the pencil stabbing your hand that's causing this, if someone needs to tell you, hey, you know, you're stabbing yourself in the hand with a pencil, you don't do that, your hand will stop hurting, it'll stop bleeding. If you need someone to tell you that, someone should tell you that. You would think that that's so obvious. Why would someone not know to do that? Why are they not reacting and making the right choice? Well, it's because there's a television program or advertising or individuals that have said, it's your choice to do it if you want to. You're not going to get that. And if you do, we got pharmaceuticals that'll take care of that. But how truthful and honest is that? Well, remember, we're talking about a society with this REACT acronym, and that's what we're building on, how we affect society. When we develop things in our body, and this can take place in schools too. This is not beyond schools. It affects everyone. especially when it's something that we see like monkeypox that is spreading very rapidly. You know, we've seen it in the 80s with HIV. You see it with hepatitis. You can see it with tuberculosis. You know, you can take typhoid, which is very common. You know, one of the leading causes of death, I think it's the second in Africa, leading cause of death is diarrhea. Because they don't have the facilities or the probiotics, they don't have access to these things that actually will help their body not dehydrate itself. You know, and go online with your students and look at these things. Look at how choices affect, and look at how it spreads. You can get stomach virus, and this is how you get stomach virus, and we teach this when we go into schools. You know, it's not a secret that the carts in Walmart, 80% of them test positive for fecal matter that's on the handles of the carts because people failed to wash their hands properly. This is a scientific fact that is proven. That's why Walmart has hand sanitizer when you come into the door and they offer you wipes. And this was long before COVID. Why? Because some people don't consider it a very necessary thing to wash their hands properly, and that affects society. Well, how do we react to that? Well, a lot of people wear gloves in stores. I've seen that an enormous amount. Latex gloves. Some people will bring their own sanitizer and spray the cart down and wipe them off. That's a very positive thing. Now, what I'm trying to get into your mind, if you react to these facts, knowing that, you know, I could get really sick if I don't do this. Because when you get a stomach virus, it means you have to ingest the fecal matter of someone that had the stomach virus. And you might think that's a very hard thing to do. If you've ever seen stomach viruses spread, you know it's very easy to do. It's very common. And then when you start to really understand what's causing it, it becomes very disgusting. And you realize society's pretty much a bowl of filth right now. But we have to consider, how is this being contributed to society and how dangerous is this? In some parts of the world, it's life or death. You know, literally take your students online, read these things, gather this information, because the things that we think are, it's not a big deal, it's okay. I washed my hands this morning, I'll wash them tonight. It is a big deal. You know, same way as COVID. It can spread very quickly. And other diseases, they can spread very quickly. That's why they're called diseases. They affect the body and they spread. You know, we have pandemics and we have endemics. Because they can't figure out, an endemic is how they can't figure out how to stop it. If we only had rules that would help with that, you would wonder why society doesn't step back. Well, this is what the Peaceful Solution is bringing forth. If there are rules that can stop and help this, we need to consider them. So turn back over to LP6C. We talked about influences. We've talked about a lot. We've talked about influences. We've talked about practicing self-control and how we react. And, of course, we have the STOP acronym. You can write that down in your book here. It's on page 121, but it's also on page... And this is just so you can write it down there so you can flip back to it if you need to. It's also on page, I think it's 46. No, it's 46 in the character unit. So it's on page 121 in the self-control unit. And yeah, there's one other thing we want to add to it. Let me turn the page. (121) of your character unit. And then, of course, 129 is the react. So you have 121 and 129. And then, of course, also write down for your notes here, when we're talking about what can you do to practice self-control, write down page 138, and that was a section entitled There Are Two Sides to Every Coin. And it goes into great detail talking about peer pressure, how they can influence you in positive and negative ways. And remember, peer pressure is also the form of an influence. And never forget that value plus influences, as we learned in the character unit, value plus influences equal our character, whether it's positive or negative. And of course, that's individualized, but once again, we want to build on ourselves within a society. So here on LP6C, looking at Procedure 2, it says, tell students in this lesson they will learn how an individual's choices in practicing self-control affects society. So that's ourselves. We're looking at ourselves and seeing how our choices affect everyone around us. Students will also learn that a lack of self-control has consequences. Ask students to define the word society. Now, you're asking them. Now, you've already went over character and society in the character unit, and we've already talked about what it means to be interdependent, and try to call back to their mind what we talked about in that character unit. And of course, the first place that we really went into talking about society and character was chapter 5 of the character unit, and that's where we got into talking about our actions, our behaviors, and rules within a society. So I want to read to you page 105 really quickly, because we're talking about how you have rules. You know, you've heard of dictators, and they refer to people as dictators, and they tell people how to do things, and that's how things go. Well, we can also be dictators too when we choose our value system, and of course when we combine that with the influences that help build our value system, and then we develop a positive or negative character. Well, think of this word dictates, and on page 105 it says our character dictates our behavior and our actions. So it actually leads the way that we're going. It is the foundation by which we interact with others. There are very few activities that we do on a daily basis in which are not directly interacting with someone. Can you recall a day when you did not see or speak to anyone? If you were quarantined from COVID, that's probably the day you can remember. Outside of that, it's kind of difficult. As human beings, we need to interact and associate with others. It is this need to belong that compels us to have friends and people that we can interact with and feel accepted by. You know, one of the ways that you can tell in society that this is proven, and if you've never had the ability or opportunity to talk to someone that's ever been put in solitary confinement for lengthy periods of time, you know, it's a very interesting thing to do, because that's one of the greatest punishments they offer you in the prison facilities. They remove you from having interaction with anyone. And why? Because it mentally is hard on someone, and it really breaks a person down. And they do that to try to scare someone into not doing negative things. And I've talked to people that have been in solitary confinement for years. Some people never recover from that. They have a hard time readapting. It literally rewires the brain, which is a scientific fact that can be done. Education rewires the brain. The lack thereof can rewire it. Continuing on, though, it says, it is this need to belong that compels us to have friends and people we can interact with and feel accepted by. It is the same need to belong that compels adults to marry, raise families, and allow people to form neighborhoods and communities. When a group of people live under a common body of laws and shared common values and interests, they are called a society. Now, when they live under a common body of laws and everyone adheres to those laws, they're called a moral society. Remember, morals are rules. And a society that lives according to those rules are a moral society. If you have a society that's breaking the rules, that's called an immoral society. And you have a lot of negative things that derive from that. So continuing on, it says, and this is page 105 of the character unit, in the same way our characters shape an individual, it can also shape society, which in turn forms our nation. In essence, character can shape our world. A choice, either positive or negative, starts with one person. So once again, when you ask your students where does it start, that's one time everyone can have a different answer and everybody would be right as long as their finger's pointing at themselves. So once again, it starts with one person, but can affect not only that person, but also a family, society, and even the world. We live in a society where our needs to belong make us interdependent upon one another. That means we depend on each other. If you're in the grocery store, you depend on other people in the grocery store to practice if they're sick. And I'm not talking about just COVID, it can be anything. You expect people to practice safe hygiene. Wearing a mask is not a negative thing. Wearing a mask is showing respect to everyone around you. It's not just respecting yourself, you're respecting everyone around you. So when you see people that wear masks, you know, South Korea is probably one of the best examples of a society. They practice wearing masks every day, and this has went on for a long time. So when you see someone doing that, they're not doing a negative thing. They're actually showing you respect by doing it. So there's no way we should ever criticize someone for wearing a mask. Well, once again, our ability here at the very end of the page, our ability to affect each other is like a stone dropped into a pond, causing one ripple after the next, each one larger than the one before. And of course, getting into page 106, that is known as the ripple effect. So keeping those things in mind, and of course, you ask students to define what society is. We talked about that common body of laws that govern society, but what is society? And ask them. If you look it up on Google, the simple definition for society is a community or group of people having common traditions, institutions, and interests. That doesn't mean it's a moral society. That just defines a society. Of course, in the character unit on page 105, we defined what a moral society is. And that's a group of people living underneath a common body of laws. And of course, they come together and they agree in keeping this common body of laws, and that helps keep everyone safe. Well, after you ask your students what they think society is, and we're going to get into what the self-control unit defines society as. We'll get into that on page 154. So that's just so you know that don't take it too deep. You're just trying to get what they have to say, because you're going to teach them in this lesson plan, this is what society really is. And you can call them back to the character unit where you've already discussed what society and that common body of laws, how it keeps society safe. So once again, you ask your students to define the word society, take a few answers, and then instruct students to turn in their handbooks to page 153 through 154 and read the introduction. And let's take a look at society. Now we're going to allow the students to do the activity on page 155. We're going to allow for class discussion as students share their ideas, and you can write your answers on the board for emphasis. Now, of course, I know a lot of classrooms have went to digital boards, but they still have the boards where you can write on. So looking over here to page 153, and we start with the very top. And this is a quotation that we've put on an enormous amount of shirts, t-shirts that go out, where the Peaceful Solution has these. And of course, they're worn by people to not just make a statement, but to influence society. And it says, the strength of a society lies in the conduct of individuals. The strength of a society lies in the conduct of individuals. And that is pretty much the strength of safety, the strength of health, the strength of success is all found within the conduct of those individuals. You can have a community, it can be a small community. The success of that community will be measured, or the strength of that community will be measured in the way the individuals of that community conduct themselves. You can also branch it out to a state, to a country, but you have to start small before you go big. Otherwise, the problem will be so big, you'll never be able to bring it to fruition in accomplishing solving problems. Problems always exist. How we solve them is what we're working on. You'll never come to a society where you don't have a problem. If you can do that, cars will never break down. Things will never break. You'll always have something. People will never have accidents where they injure themselves. We're always going to have situations. How we solve those situations is what the Peaceful Solution is really striving to achieve and get into the minds of society. So here in chapter 6, Self-Control in Society, the introduction. It says, in the previous chapter, you learned how important it is to practice self-control when dealing with your emotions, thoughts, and actions. And that right there is page 45. If you write down page 45, keeping it in perspective. Keeping it in perspective. And we'll read a little bit more, but we want to take some things from this tonight. I know we haven't got very far in class tonight, but these are very important when we're talking about laying out society. And why is it so important? Sometimes when we individualize ourselves and we realize that my choices help dictate society, because my character does, that doesn't mean that we become dictators of society. That doesn't mean that our input is the only input that's needed and no other input is needed. That's it, just mine. Because if we all do that, then we create a very confused society. Because, as they say in Japan, You know, it takes a village to raise a child. And in communities, it really takes a community to raise healthy lifestyles and healthy families. Because that community all has to contribute to those rules and agree with those rules. And keeping things in perspective, and not just that, but also page 46, looking over to the other side, applying the self-control to your emotions. Because when we keep them in perspective, those emotions have to be controlled. And just very quickly here on page 45, we just want to read through this, the very top part. It says, keeping it in perspective. Negative thoughts and strong emotions can cloud our ability to see things in perspective and increase the opportunity to act irrationally. Remember that impulsive thinking, impulsive decision making. To see a situation in perspective means to be able to view things in their proper order of importance without overreacting. Even though certain situations can trigger strong emotions, it is up to you to control how you respond. And remember the RESPOND acronym. Have you ever heard the saying, hindsight is 20/20? This typically means that once the situation has passed and we're not emotional about it, we're able to look back and to point out how we could have made better choices. The problem with this line of thinking is that some choices are irreversible. And that's what we have to remember. We can look back at some things and, I made the wrong choice, you know. And these are things that don't harm someone. You know, you painted the room gray and you're like, yeah, I like blue better. Should have went blue. I think I'll go blue, you know, or whatever. But if you're trying to make a choice, I'm in a rush, I need to get somewhere, that stop sign is a suggestion, or that light will stay yellow for at least 3 seconds. I'm going to speed up and I'm going through it. And you hit someone. Well, that's a choice that was made. And looking back on it when you're sitting in the jail, you know, cell, I probably shouldn't have done that. After you spend money on your lawyer and everything else. Well, remember our decisions affect others. And we have to be very careful about our decisions and how they affect others. That doesn't mean that people should be allowed to break rules. Remember, a moral society is a society that is governed by rules. And if we're ever contemplating, well, what needs to be done? The first thing that should come to our mind is, what are the rules that were put into place to govern this? That's the very first place we start. And then, are we adhering to the rules? And then you start, well, this is a breaking of the rule, this is a breaking of the rule, well, this needs to come back into compliance with the rule. Because the rules, as we've taught from the beginning, those rules, they help keep us safe. That's what brings forth a moral society. And if we let society continually breaking the rules, well, you can do that, and we have done that as a society. You have murder, you have rape, you have disease, you have many negative things that take place when these rules are not looked at as important. You can have a rule that says if a person gets with a person and they do this, they can create a disease. That's a rule, just like the law of gravity. Now, if you break those rules and you start saying it's okay, but we can put a Band-Aid on it. When you break it, we can give you a shot. And that Band-Aid, you know, it'll cover it. It covers the action or the result that came forth for a small time. But if you could imagine planting a tree within your body, planting anything, you know, and I'll give you an example. I'll say planting cancer. And I speak from something I've seen this myself. We think of cancer as something, you know, it takes place in the body. And if you've never experienced this with someone, you kind of, sometimes it's kind of hard to understand how cancer works and how it literally, it's a living thing that sucks the life out of your body. It just starts spreading. It's kind of like seeing mold grow in a wall. It starts covering everything. So it's not that cancer is a dead thing. Cancer is a living thing. And it sucks the life out of the living things, and it takes control. And when people get to the latter stages, it's very common for that cancer to come outside the body and expose itself to where the body literally opens up. It gets into the walls of the body, whether it's the abdomen, the back, and the skin literally opens up. And you can literally see it with your eyes. What was once inside, you see it on the outside. And if you were in that situation, I've seen people that their backs were literally falling apart. This was when I was very young. It was a person in my wife's family, to where they went to pick him up and the skin literally just came right off his back. And he wasn't a very old man. And then I've seen it for myself and my own family, these effects. Now imagine if you were in that situation and you could go back and look, what was it that started this? If I could just go back and see what caused this, I could undo it. You know, and that's a great idea. I remember they made a movie one time called The Butterfly Effect. You could go back and you could change it, and then you went back to the future, see how it worked out. If you didn't like it, go back and change it again. We don't get that in society. When you make these decisions, the only way to try to avoid it is to make the best decisions that we can that comply within the rules. That's the only way that we can work towards making society a better place. When we start saying, I know if this person does this with this person, I know it creates this disease, but that's their choice to do that. You're right, it is their choice. But we need to teach people that that's what you do, then you do realize that you're going to die, right? Well, there's a new drug now, you can take it. Magic Johnson takes it. He's been living for 25 years with this. If you ask him if he would like to do over, I've seen interviews where he said, I would like to go back and redo what I did. I would like to not have what I have. He's still living, and he's a very wealthy man, but all of that money, just like one of the founders of Microsoft who died from bone cancer, all of that money will not keep you from having that disease spread. There's not enough money to stop it. There's not enough Band-Aids to cover it. You know, and I'm individualizing this, but society as itself, if you can imagine society having a cancer and it's growing with war, destruction, threats of nuclear war that affects everyone. That's the cancer of society. The argumentation, the lack of solving problems, and the my idea is the only idea it counts, and everybody needs to agree with my idea because we have the bigger gun. That's a breakdown in society. That's very immoral. If you have to threaten someone with causing bodily harm to them, if you have to threaten them that if you don't do this, we're going to not only bomb you, but everyone around you. That's a very negative way of doing things. But if you tell someone, you're going to suffer if you do this. If you commit these actions, you're going to suffer. That's very positive. You're teaching them that. It's very negative if they choose to do it. But at least they were told. Well, once again, think about society and how this is spreading. Continuing on here, in the middle of the paragraph. Well, let's go. It says you also learn that you need self-control to communicate respectfully and to resist negative influences. Once again, respecting others in communication. Remember, that's not just words. It's tone of voice. It's body language. You know, text do a horrible job of expressing emotion. And emojis do a horrible job of expressing emotion. Especially when you're getting messages in different languages and they throw emojis into it, because emojis don't always express the same in every country. And it can be a great challenge. But once again, it says, now that you have explored some of the ways in which you, as an individual, can use self-control to improve every aspect of your life, let us look at whether the society in which we live practices self-control. Think and question yourself on that. Do you think society is using self-control and society has self-control rooted deeply within it? Well, you would need to go to the mirror first and look in the mirror and go, well, do I have self-control deeply rooted within me? Am I controlling myself on a daily basis? Because that society includes you. So if you say society is doing it, that means you're doing it. If you're not doing it, you can't honestly say society is doing it. Continuing on here, it says, when was the last time you watched the news or read the newspaper? Have you noticed the number of crimes in the form of theft, violence, and aggression that are reported daily? Have you ever noticed that anger, violence, and aggression also exist between nations? When conflicts between nations are not resolved peacefully, the results are wars and threats of wars. Crime, violence, aggression, and war are only some of the ways that a lack of self-control is displayed within our society. Notice each person has the choice to practice self-control in his or her life. They can choose to acquire their belongings honestly and communicate respectively if they want to live in a peaceful society. On the other hand, if they fail to practice self-control, many lives will be affected. In this chapter, you will explore how every aspect of self-control also applies to our society, nation, and world. You will learn that each individual must consistently practice self-control if we are to live in a society that is free from hate, violence, and aggression. So we're going to stop right there. And of course, our next teacher, William, will come back and he will rehearse a lot of the things that we've covered tonight, because it's extremely important that in rehearsing these things, as we try to always rehearse them, to bring back to our mindset of what we're doing, because we're building. So this is not something we want to rush through, because once he starts getting into that, he's going to take a closer look at society and how we're building with or without these rules. So our next class is going to be this Wednesday. It'll be at 5:30. This coming Wednesday, 5:30. So it'll be the 8th, the third day. So August the 3rd at 5:30. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.